The recipes from old cookbooks, each ready in 10 minutes, once turned scraps into suppers and kept families fed fast. These quick fixes were thrifty, comforting, and always on the table in a flash. Why did we ever stop cooking this way? Shrimp wiggle was the kind of dish that perfectly captured the spirit of mid-century convenience cooking, and it was as charmingly simple as it sounds. Housewives looking to put something quick and satisfying on the table would open a can of shrimp, another can of peas, and stir both into a quick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Once thickened, the whole mixture would be spooned generously over toast, biscuits, or even rice. What made this dish endure in old cookbooks was not only how inexpensive it was, but how much it looked like a true dinner, when in reality it took barely 10 minutes from start to finish. Children loved the creamy sauce and bright peas, while adults felt like they were eating something elegant thanks to the shrimp. The name itself added a little bit of fun, which made this meal a small morale booster in an otherwise frugal kitchen. Mock egg lemon soup was a Depression-era lifesaver that made its way into many family recipe cards and church cookbooks. The premise was simple. Instead of long-simmered chicken soup, you heated up a quick broth, whisked in eggs, and added a squeeze of lemon for brightness. The hot broth would cook the eggs almost instantly, creating silky strands that thickened the liquid without any flour or cream. In less than 10 minutes, you had a dish that tasted like comfort but cost next to nothing. Families appreciated the warm, tangy flavor on cold days, and since both eggs and lemons could stretch across several meals, this soup quickly became a favorite. Its Greek inspiration was often mentioned, but the thrifty American version was much lighter and faster. You could have a pot on the table in the time it took to set out the bowls, making it one of those resourceful recipes that never really went away. Banana and sour cream salad might sound unusual today, but in the middle of the 20th century, it was a prized quick dish that often doubled as dessert. Cookbooks called for nothing more than slicing ripe bananas, layering them neatly on a plate, covering them with sour cream, and sprinkling the top with a dusting of sugar. In less than 10 minutes, you had a salad that was creamy, tangy, and sweet all at once. Housewives appreciated how it used just 3 ingredients, yet looked elegant enough for luncheons or church gatherings. Children enjoyed the sweetness, while adults saw it as a lighter alternative to heavier pies or cakes. What made it endure was how easy it was to scale. A single banana could serve one person, or several could fill a platter. It was also one of those recipes that made use of fruit before it spoiled, which was essential in thrifty kitchens. Ham and pickle relish. Sandwich spread is another reminder of how cookbooks leaned heavily on economy and speed. All it took was grinding up leftover ham, mixing it with a few spoonfuls of sweet pickle relish, and binding it all together with mayonnaise or mustard. In under 10 minutes, you had a spread that could be layered onto bread, stuffed into rolls, or served with crackers. It turned small scraps of meat into something filling, and the relish added enough tang to disguise the fact that the portion of ham was very small. This recipe became especially popular in wartime cookbooks when stretching protein was essential. Families enjoyed the bright, savory flavor and the convenience of having a ready-to-serve sandwich filler. It was perfect for school lunches or quick suppers, and many people still recall this as a nostalgic favorite from their childhood kitchen tables. Oatmeal. Griddle cakes were born from the idea that nothing should go to waste, not even the cold pot of oatmeal left from breakfast. Cookbooks encouraged thrifty cooks to stir in a little flour, baking powder, and milk to form a thick batter that could be spooned onto a hot griddle. Within minutes, you had hearty cakes with a crisp outside and a tender inside. The beauty of this recipe was that it disguised leftovers as something entirely new. Families often topped them with syrup, molasses, or a pat of butter, and suddenly yesterday's porridge became today's satisfying lunch. These cakes were not only quick, but also surprisingly filling, which made them especially appealing during leaner times. For housewives looking to stretch every penny, turning scraps into something warm and comforting was not just resourceful, it was rewarding. This recipe captured that spirit perfectly. Grapefruit halves with brown sugar were a breakfast table staple in the 40s and 50s, and they could not be simpler. Housewives would cut grapefruits in half, loosen the sections with a knife, sprinkle the tops with brown sugar, and place them under the broiler just long enough for the sugar to bubble. In less than 10 minutes, you had a dish that looked elegant, yet cost very little. The bitterness of the grapefruit paired with the sweetness of the caramelized sugar made for a refreshing start to the day. Many cookbooks praised this dish as a healthy option during a time when vitamins were heavily emphasized in advertising and diet culture. It also became popular as a light dessert for luncheons, adding a touch of sophistication without requiring any complicated preparation. With its bright color and quick assembly, this recipe was one of the easiest ways to impress with almost no effort. Quick scalloped tomatoes was one of those recipes that appeared in nearly every community cookbook because of its low cost and speed. The instructions were straightforward. Open a can of tomatoes, stir them with breadcrumbs, butter, and a pinch of sugar, then bake them just until hot and bubbling. In 10 minutes flat, you had a side dish that stretched canned goods into something hearty and flavorful. Families served it alongside meats or with slices of bread, and it quickly became a way to make canned vegetables feel more like a proper meal. The texture of soft tomatoes and crunchy crumbs gave it appeal, while the butter made it feel more indulgent than it really was. For many households, this was the kind of recipe that bridged the gap between practicality and comfort, proving that even with limited ingredients, flavor could still shine. Mock apple pie with crackers was one of the most clever Depression-era tricks to ever appear in print. When apples were scarce or expensive, cooks would take soda crackers, sugar, water, cinnamon, and lemon juice to recreate the flavor and texture of apple filling. The crackers softened in the syrupy mixture and remarkably resembled tender apple slices once baked. Covered with a simple pie crust, the result looked and tasted enough like real apple pie that many guests never suspected the difference. Best of all, it could be made in about 10 minutes of active work, since the filling came together on the stovetop in no time. Cookbooks praised it as a marvel of resourcefulness, and it became a household favorite during times when true fruit pies were out of reach. Few recipes show the ingenuity of old cookbooks better than this one. Jello whip salad was a mid-century sensation that turned a box of gelatin into something creamy and light in almost no time at all. Housewives would prepare the gelatin, let it partially set, and then whip it together with chilled evaporated milk until it became fluffy. The result was a pastel-colored salad that could be dressed up with fruit or served plain. It was inexpensive, fun to look at, and quick enough to prepare for any gathering. Many cookbooks encouraged it as a safe dish for potlucks because it could be made ahead and transported easily. For families, it was a treat that required almost no cooking skills, yet looked impressive in a glass bowl. It captured the era's fascination with convenience foods while still managing to feel special. The creamy texture made it different from ordinary gelatin, which is why it remained so popular for decades. Potato pancakes from Instant Mash proved that even convenience products could be reimagined into something homey and satisfying. Old cookbooks often suggested taking leftover mashed potatoes, or even instant ones prepared quickly, mixing them with an egg and a little flour, then frying them in a skillet until golden. In less than 10 minutes, you had crispy, comforting patties that worked for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The beauty of this hack was how it turned something as simple as potato flakes into a versatile dish with real character. Families enjoyed topping them with sour cream, applesauce, or gravy, depending on what was available. For homemakers trying to save time while still offering variety, this recipe felt like a small victory. It proved that even shortcuts could deliver a dish that tasted just as good as traditional versions. Cucumber and sour cream salad was one of those fast dishes that found its way into nearly every old cookbook because it required so little effort and always tasted refreshing. Thin slices of cucumber were tossed in a dressing made from sour cream, sugar, and a splash of vinegar or lemon juice to give it balance. The sweet and tangy mixture clung to the crisp cucumber slices, making the salad both cooling and creamy. In summer months, it was often served straight from the icebox, which gave it even more appeal. Housewives appreciated how quickly it came together, often in less than 10 minutes, and how it could stretch a garden's worth of cucumbers into a dish that seemed more substantial. Families liked it as a side with roast meats or sandwiches, and it often appeared at picnics or potlucks because it traveled well in jars. The salad's popularity came from its thrift as much as its taste, since cucumbers were cheap and sour cream was often at hand. It was simple, satisfying, and a little bit special without being complicated. Vienna sausages with mustard sauce were one of those recipes that combined convenience with just enough flair to feel like a real meal. The sausages came straight from a can, which made them affordable and easy to store. To prepare them, homemakers browned the small links in a skillet and then whisked together a quick glaze of mustard, vinegar, and sugar. Once poured over the sizzling sausages, the sauce thickened slightly, coating them in a tangy, sweet flavor that elevated the humble meat. Families often served the dish over toast, crackers, or with mashed potatoes to make it stretch further. Old cookbooks highlighted this as a dependable recipe for busy nights, when you needed something on the table fast. Children liked the mild flavor of the sausages, while adults appreciated the sharp bite of the mustard sauce. It was not elegant food, but it was practical, filling, and just distinctive enough to stand out from the ordinary. In many homes, this quick recipe became an affordable treat remembered long after the cans disappeared from the pantry. Rice pudding stovetop shortcut was one of the most beloved examples of transforming leftovers into dessert without fuss. Instead of starting with raw rice and waiting for it to cook slowly, Thrifty cooks simply reheated already cooked rice in a saucepan with milk sugar and a hint of vanilla or nutmeg. The heat thickened the mixture almost instantly, and within minutes you had a pudding that was creamy, warm, and comforting. This trick was praised in countless cookbooks because it turned scraps of rice from last night's supper into a sweet dish for today. Families enjoyed it hot or cold, and it could be stretched even further by adding raisins or cinnamon when available. It was especially popular in lean times when every grain of rice had to be used wisely. The stovetop version required no baking and almost no waiting, which made it perfect for busy homemakers. What might have otherwise gone to waste became a cherished treat, showing how resourcefulness could turn something simple into something delightful. Tomato and cottage cheese plate was a dish that reflected both thrift and the diet trends of the mid-20th century. Cookbooks often included it in sections on light suppers or summer meals because it was inexpensive, quick, and required no cooking at all. The recipe was straightforward: thick slices of ripe tomato arranged neatly on a plate and topped with a scoop of cottage cheese, sometimes sprinkled with pepper or paprika for color. It looked wholesome, tasted refreshing, and was considered fashionable during years when calorie-conscious meals were gaining attention. Families who grew tomatoes in their gardens could put together the dish in under 10 minutes, making it both practical and nutritious. Cottage cheese was prized for its protein, and when paired with tomatoes, it made a plate that satisfied without feeling heavy. Though simple, it often appeared at luncheons and gatherings because its bright colors gave it visual appeal. It was the kind of dish that proved old cookbooks valued simplicity just as much as ingenuity. Quick grape nuts custard was one of those recipes that transformed an everyday cereal into something that felt like a homemade dessert. The method was simple. Heat milk on the stove, stir in sugar, vanilla, and a handful of grape nuts, and let the mixture thicken as the cereal softened. The result was a warm, lightly textured custard that was ready in minutes and cost next to nothing. Many old cookbooks recommended it as an economical way to serve dessert for a family without needing eggs or cream in large amounts. The cereal gave body and nutty flavor, while the sugar and vanilla made it taste more indulgent than it truly was. Families enjoyed it both hot and chilled, and it became especially popular during the Depression when stretching every ingredient mattered. The dish proved that convenience foods like cereal could be adapted creatively into something entirely new. It was quick, practical, and comforting, making it a staple of many kitchens for years. Pea fritters were one of those clever Depression-era recipes that turned inexpensive canned vegetables into something filling and satisfying. Cooks would mash peas with a little flour and egg, season them with salt and pepper, and drop spoonfuls of the mixture into a hot skillet. In minutes, the patties crisped on the outside while staying tender inside, creating a dish that was both thrifty and hearty. Old cookbooks praised pea fritters as an excellent way to serve vegetables in a form that children were more likely to eat. They were versatile too, working as a side dish, a quick lunch, or even a meat substitute when supplies were low. Families often topped them with gravy or a dab of ketchup to add flavor. For households trying to stretch every can in the pantry, pea fritters felt like a small victory. They were quick to prepare, easy to adapt, and proof that even the simplest ingredients could become something memorable with a little imagination. Celery Victor was a dish that proved even a humble vegetable like celery could be dressed up into something special. This recipe called for cooking celery stalks until just tender, then marinating them quickly in a vinaigrette of oil, vinegar, and herbs. Once chilled, the celery was served as a salad, often on lettuce leaves or with slices of hard-boiled egg for garnish. Old cookbooks promoted it as a sophisticated option, despite its modest ingredients, and it was sometimes featured in restaurants before making its way into home kitchens. Families appreciated how quickly it came together and how it made use of a vegetable that was often overlooked. Celery Victor was light, refreshing, and inexpensive, which made it perfect for luncheons, picnics, or summer suppers. It was the kind of recipe that elevated the ordinary with just a few simple steps. Though celery rarely takes center stage, this dish gave it a moment to shine in a thrifty and flavorful way. Applesauce cakelets were a charming way to bring homemade sweetness to the table in almost no time at all. Cookbooks suggested mixing flour, sugar, spices, and applesauce into a quick batter, then baking the mixture in small tins or cupcake pans. Because the applesauce added both moisture and flavor, the cakes required very little fat, which made them perfect during times when butter or shortening was scarce. The batter came together quickly, and in less than 10 minutes it could be in the oven baking. Families loved the warm spice scent that filled the house, and the small cakelets were easy to share or pack into lunches. Applesauce cakelets were also forgiving, which meant they worked even for inexperienced bakers. The recipe was endlessly adaptable with nuts or raisins when available, but it was delicious even in its simplest form. They represented the spirit of old cookbooks, proving that speed and thrift could still deliver something that felt indulgent. Sardine salad sandwich was one of those recipes that reflected the ingenuity of frugal kitchens, especially during years when meat was expensive or scarce. Cooks would mash canned sardines with mayonnaise, lemon juice, and sometimes chopped onion or celery to create a flavorful spread. The mixture could be prepared in minutes and spread onto bread or crackers for a meal that was cheap yet nourishing. Old cookbooks encouraged this recipe because sardines were inexpensive, shelf-stable, and packed with protein and healthy oils. Families often served the sandwiches for lunches, picnics, or even light suppers, making it a versatile standby. The flavor was bold but balanced by the creamy mayonnaise and bright lemon. For households needing to stretch a few cans into several servings, this recipe worked beautifully. It was not fancy, but it was practical, and for many it became a nostalgic taste of childhood lunches. Sardine salad sandwiches stood as proof that old cookbooks made the most of every pantry staple. Tomato juice cocktail was a spiced drink that appeared frequently in cookbooks of the 1930s and 1940s as both an appetizer and a health tonic. The recipe was quick. Tomato juice poured over ice and seasoned with Worcestershire sauce, lemon juice, and sometimes celery salt or a dash of pepper. Served in glasses before a meal, it was seen as refreshing, inexpensive, and surprisingly sophisticated. Housewives could prepare it in minutes, and it gave even a simple supper the feeling of a restaurant course. At a time when vitamins and nutrition were highly promoted, tomato juice cocktails also gained a reputation as a healthy option. Families liked its tangy flavor, and it was sometimes offered to guests in place of alcoholic drinks during Prohibition and the years that followed. This recipe showed how easily a humble canned product could be elevated with a few dashes of seasoning. It was a thrifty, stylish way to make ordinary meals feel more special. Cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing was a staple in old cookbooks because it could be thrown together in minutes with only a handful of ingredients. Shredded cabbage was sprinkled with sugar, doused with vinegar, and left to soften slightly before serving. The tangy dressing contrasted with the crunch of the raw cabbage, creating a side dish that was both refreshing and filling. Many homemakers loved this recipe because it made use of a vegetable that was cheap, hearty, and often stored for long periods in root cellars. It was also endlessly adaptable, with onions, peppers, or even carrots sometimes added for extra color and flavor. Unlike mayonnaise-based slaws that came later, the vinegar version was more practical for picnics, church suppers, and potlucks since it did not spoil as quickly. Families appreciated its crisp taste on hot days, and it paired easily with meats, sandwiches, or fried foods. In kitchens where stretching ahead of cabbage could mean several meals, this recipe was a reliable friend. It was thrifty, bright, and a reminder that flavor did not have to come from expensive ingredients. The slaw was simple but never plain, and that is why it was written into so many cookbooks of the past. Quick prune whip was one of those desserts that showed up in mid-century cookbooks as a clever way to turn an overlooked fruit into something surprisingly elegant. The process began with stewing prunes until soft, mashing them lightly, and folding them into stiffly whipped egg whites with sugar. The result was a light, airy dessert with a delicate sweetness and a gentle fruit flavor that made it feel more refined than its humble origins. Housewives liked this recipe because it was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and quick to set on the table after supper. It was also considered a healthier dessert option, since prunes were associated with good digestion and wholesome eating. For children, the whip's fluffy texture made it more appealing than simply being handed a bowl of stewed fruit. It was often served chilled in small dishes, sometimes with a dollop of whipped cream when available. This dessert carried the charm of turning something ordinary into a treat without requiring fancy ingredients. It was a practical recipe, but one that still felt indulgent to those who ate it. Quick prune whip reminded families that dessert could be light, fast, and frugal all at once, and it never failed to please. Creamed mushrooms on toast was one of those quick dishes that walked the line between supper and snack, making it a favorite in countless households. The mushrooms were sliced thin, sautéed briefly, and folded into a simple white sauce of butter, flour, and milk. When spooned over thick slices of toasted bread, the mixture became creamy, savory, and filling without needing meat. Families leaned on this recipe during lean years, since mushrooms were often foraged or inexpensive when canned. Old cookbooks praised it as both speedy and sophisticated, especially when served with parsley or paprika sprinkled on top for presentation. The texture of creamy sauce soaking into toast gave it a satisfying richness that made it feel more substantial than the ingredients might suggest. Housewives appreciated the balance of thrift and comfort, and children enjoyed the warm, earthy taste of the mushrooms paired with soft bread. It was the kind of recipe that fit neatly into the rhythm of everyday life, quick to make, versatile to serve, and dependable in taste. In kitchens that valued speed and satisfaction, creamed mushrooms on toast was a quiet star. Corn fritters with syrup were a fast, comforting dish that many families relied on when they needed something warm and hearty without much effort. The recipe called for mixing cornmeal with a bit of flour, milk, and canned or fresh corn kernels, then frying spoonfuls of the batter in a hot skillet until golden brown. The crisp outside and tender inside made the fritters irresistible, especially when topped with maple syrup or molasses. Old cookbooks often promoted them as a budget-friendly alternative to pancakes, since cornmeal was cheap and plentiful. Housewives could have them on the table in under 10 minutes, which made them perfect for breakfast, lunch, or even a light supper. Families appreciated how filling they were, and children loved their sweet, rustic flavor. They were especially popular in rural areas where corn was a staple crop, making the recipe both accessible and practical. Corn fritters with syrup were more than just food. They were a reminder of simple pleasures created out of modest means. Quick, satisfying, and always welcome, they brought comfort with every bite. Stuffed tomatoes with tuna or egg salad were a favorite recipe in old cookbooks that balanced elegance with practicality. The idea was simple: hollow out fresh tomatoes and fill them with a cold salad made from canned tuna or chopped hard-boiled eggs mixed with mayonnaise. This made a dish that was colorful, refreshing, and ready in minutes, with no cooking required. It was especially popular in the summer when gardens overflowed with ripe tomatoes and families wanted something cool and light. Homemakers liked that it turned basic pantry staples into a meal that looked fancy enough for luncheons or church gatherings. Children often found it fun to eat since each tomato became its own little bowl. The recipe was also thrifty, making a small amount of tuna or egg stretch further when combined with the juicy tomato. Served on a bed of lettuce or alongside crackers, it quickly became a reliable standby. It showed how creativity could make everyday ingredients into something memorable. Stuffed tomatoes offered color, flavor, and nourishment, all wrapped into a neat and tidy package. Quick rice and raisin cereal was a warm, comforting breakfast that many families turned to when they needed to use up leftover rice from dinner. The method was fast. Add the cooked rice to a saucepan with milk, sugar, and a handful of raisins, then simmer until thickened and fragrant. In under 10 minutes, the rice transformed into a sweet, porridge-like cereal that filled hungry bellies with very little cost. Old cookbooks praised it as an economical way to stretch a grain across multiple meals, ensuring that nothing went to waste. Families enjoyed the subtle sweetness of the raisins, which plumped up in the hot milk, and often added a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg for flavor. It was also forgiving, working with whatever milk or sweetener happened to be on hand. This recipe showed the kind of everyday ingenuity that kept households fed and satisfied during lean years. It was proof that leftovers were never just scraps. They were opportunities for something new. Rice and raisin cereal reminded families that comfort could be built out of yesterday's pot and today's imagination. Apple and cheddar slices were a quick, satisfying pairing that showed up in countless cookbooks as both a snack and a light meal. Thick slices of crisp apple were arranged neatly on a plate with wedges of sharp cheddar cheese, making a dish that was colorful, flavorful, and ready in minutes. The sweet, tart flavor of the apple balanced beautifully with the savory sharpness of the cheese, creating a combination that was both refreshing and filling. Homemakers liked this recipe because it required no cooking, which made it perfect for hot days or busy schedules. It was also considered fashionable in diet-conscious eras, since it provided protein without the heaviness of bread or meat. Families often served it for lunch, picnics, or even as part of a supper tray. The simplicity was its greatest strength, reminding people that quick meals did not need to be complicated to be satisfying. Apple and cheddar slices were both thrifty and timeless, a pairing that felt just as much at home on a farmhouse table as it did at a luncheon. Boston lettuce with French dressing was one of the quickest salads to prepare, but it carried a sense of refinement that appealed to homemakers who wanted meals to feel special. The recipe called for tender leaves of Boston lettuce arranged in a bowl and drizzled with a simple dressing of oil, vinegar, salt, and mustard. Sometimes a dash of paprika or sugar was added to adjust the flavor, but the appeal was always in the freshness of the lettuce paired with the sharp tang of the dressing. Old cookbooks encouraged serving this salad at luncheons or as the first course at dinner because it added color and a touch of elegance without requiring more than 5 minutes of work. Families appreciated its lightness, especially during warmer months when heavy foods were less welcome. The recipe reflected the growing popularity of salads in mid-century cooking, when health and presentation were becoming more important. Boston lettuce with French dressing was quick, thrifty, and stylish all at once. Egg custard cups made on the stovetop were one of those clever recipes that made dessert possible even without an oven. Cookbooks instructed homemakers to whisk together eggs, milk, sugar, and a splash of vanilla, then pour the mixture into small cups and set them in a double boiler to steam. In less than 15 minutes, the custards firmed into silky, sweet servings that could be enjoyed warm or chilled. This recipe was especially practical in summer when turning on the oven was unpleasant. Families loved the smooth, creamy texture, and the portion-sized cups made it easy to serve at gatherings or for children. Sometimes nutmeg was sprinkled on top for flavor and decoration. Egg custard cups embodied the thrift and resourcefulness of vintage kitchens, using simple ingredients to create a dish that felt indulgent without requiring extra cost. They were proof that even the humblest pantry could produce something elegant. In homes that valued both speed and tradition, custard cups were always welcome. Cinnamon toast with cream was a recipe that managed to turn the most ordinary bread into something that felt like a real treat. Slices of bread were toasted, buttered generously, sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar, and then topped with a pour of cold or warm cream. The cream soaked into the bread, mingling with the sweet spice to create a dessert-like dish that could be ready in minutes. Families often served it for breakfast, but it was just as common as a late-night snack or a quick dessert when company arrived. Old cookbooks promoted it as both thrifty and satisfying, since it required nothing more than ingredients already in the pantry. Children loved the sweetness, while adults appreciated the comfort of such a simple indulgence. It was especially popular during lean years because it felt extravagant, despite being made from basics. Cinnamon toast with cream was not just food, it was memory, comfort, and nostalgia served on a plate. Grape and cheese salad was a sweet and savory cold dish that combined juicy, fresh grapes with cubes of sharp cheddar cheese and a touch of mayonnaise for added creaminess. This salad was a common favorite at family gatherings, potlucks, and holiday meals throughout the 1960s, appreciated for its unique blend of contrasting flavors and simple, quick assembly. The natural sweetness of the grapes perfectly balanced the tangy, robust flavor of the cheddar cheese, while the mayonnaise provided a smooth texture that brought all the elements together. Often served chilled on a bed of crisp lettuce or alongside other cold dishes, this recipe exemplified the era's fondness for pairing sweet fruits with savory ingredients in cold salads and appetizers. While it may seem unusual to modern tastes, grape and cheese salad remains a nostalgic symbol of inventive and approachable mid-century American cooking. It highlights the creativity and resourcefulness of home cooks who sought to create tasty dishes that were both convenient and visually appealing, capturing the comforting spirit of quick recipes from the 1960s. Cheddar grits with butter were the Southern kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when everyone still needed something hot and filling. Quick grits, a little butter, a handful of shredded cheese, and breakfast was done before you even finished your first cup of coffee. It was the kind of meal found in tattered cookbooks, handed down from grandmothers who knew how to stretch a pantry without cutting corners on comfort. These grits were creamy, cheesy, and surprisingly satisfying for something that took less than 10 minutes to whip up. You did not need fancy groceries or a stocked fridge, just the basics. It kept bellies full through school days, work shifts, or long hours in the fields. For a lot of folks, this was breakfast you ate standing up, spoon in hand, on your way out the door. Simple, cheap, and quietly comforting. Grits have stuck around in fancier forms, but this quick, everyday version has slipped through the cracks of modern cooking. Applesauce toast with nutmeg was the frugal breakfast tucked inside every homemaker column and Depression-era guide when groceries ran low but mornings kept coming. You would toast a slice of bread, smear it with applesauce, sprinkle a little nutmeg on top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. It was practical, filling, and sweet enough to feel comforting when everything else felt stretched thin. Families leaned on meals like this when fruit was scarce, budgets were tight, and creativity had to carry the kitchen. Applesauce lasted longer than fresh fruit, nutmeg added warmth, and toast turned it all into a quick meal that actually filled you up. It was not fancy, but it worked, and you could find it everywhere from farm kitchens to city apartments. Some folks added butter, others kept it plain, but either way, it was one of those quiet little breakfasts that made hard mornings feel a little easier. These days, applesauce toast barely gets a mention, but back then it quietly carried families through. Quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes was one of those meals that showed up when there was not much left in the pantry, but families still needed dinner on the table fast. You boiled some elbow macaroni, opened a can of stewed tomatoes, and stirred it all together with salt, pepper, and a little butter if you could spare it. That was it. It sounds humble, but back when budgets were tight and grocery trips were rare, this simple stovetop meal came through. The pasta filled you up, the tomatoes added flavor, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. You would find recipes like this scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next, or clipped from women's magazines that promised fast, filling meals on a shoestring budget. It might seem plain now, but quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes helped plenty of families stretch their groceries and make dinner happen, even on the hardest days. quick ham salad on saltines was the fast fix lunch that made diced ham, mayo, and a little pickle relish stretch way further than you would think. You chopped leftover ham, mixed it with mayonnaise and relish, and spooned it onto a stack of crackers. That was lunch, done in minutes and surprisingly filling. Old cookbooks loved this recipe for being cheap, easy, and portable, which is why it kept popping up in school lunch guides and picnic sections. You could dress it up with celery or onions, but most families kept it simple with just ham, mayo, and a little crunch. It might not look like much, but it worked when you needed protein, salt, and something satisfying without standing over a stove. The saltines soaked up just enough moisture, the ham salad added creaminess, and together it passed for lunch, even when the fridge was running low. Cream cheese and pineapple spread was a sweet and tangy cold appetizer popular in the 1960s, combining smooth cream cheese with crushed canned pineapple for a luscious and easy-to-make spread. This recipe required no cooking and could be whipped up in minutes by folding pineapple into softened cream cheese, sometimes with a touch of sugar or coconut for extra flavor. Served chilled on crackers, celery sticks, or as a sandwich filling, the spread offered a perfect balance of creamy richness and fruity sweetness that delighted guests at parties and family gatherings. Its popularity reflected the era's love for combining convenience foods with bold, contrasting flavors that were both indulgent and approachable. Cream cheese and pineapple spread became a staple of mid-century entertaining due to its simplicity, taste, and visual appeal. While tastes have evolved, this spread remains a nostalgic favorite for those who appreciate quick, retro recipes that transform everyday ingredients into delicious treats. Cinnamon toast with broiler crisp was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once felt fancy, even though it came straight from the bread box. You would take a slice of white bread, butter it generously, sprinkle it with sugar and cinnamon, and slide it under the broiler until the top bubbled and crisped. That was it. No pancake mix, no waffle irons, just the broiler and a little patience. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert. Parents loved it because it was fast, and everyone loved it because it used pantry staples. During the Great Depression and even into the 70s, families relied on simple breakfasts like this to stretch groceries without giving up flavor. The sugar caramelized on top, the bread toasted just enough, and suddenly plain breakfast felt like a treat. You could find versions of it in old community cookbooks, school recipe cards, even homemaker magazines. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of frozen waffles and cereal boxes. Cottage cheese with canned fruit cocktail was the speedy, no-cook breakfast that lived in every 1970s diet book and homemaker guide, promising light meals that took barely any effort. You would scoop cottage cheese onto a plate, pour canned fruit cocktail over the top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and surprisingly filling, it worked when mornings were busy, but everyone still needed something practical to eat. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were tight, and dieters swore by it for being low effort and satisfying enough to skip the fancy recipes. It was a trick you could find tucked inside women's magazines, diet plans, and community cookbooks trying to stretch fruit and dairy into a real meal. Some folks added nuts or honey, others kept it plain. But either way, it quietly filled countless tables before frozen meals and boxed breakfasts took over. Funny how those quick, reliable meals slipped away. Fried bologna and mustard sandwich was a 10-minute fix that never pretended to be fancy, but always hit the spot. You tossed a slice of bologna into a hot pan, let it sizzle until the edges curled, slapped it onto soft bread, and added mustard. That was it. Simple, quick, and surprisingly satisfying. Back in Grandma's day, this showed up when money was tight, groceries were low, or you just needed something fast before heading back to work or school. It was salty, smoky, and the bologna crisped up just enough to feel like real cooking. Kids loved it, adults leaned on it, and every household had their own little spin on the recipe. Some added cheese, some toasted the bread, but most kept it plain and practical. You would not find this in glossy magazines, but you would find it tucked in those old handwritten cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next. Another quick forgotten gem from a time when meals had to be fast, filling, and affordable. Cabbage and hot dog stir-fry was the skillet lunch that popped up in every budget cookbook from the 1970s, and it stuck around because it worked. You chopped cabbage, sliced up hot dogs, threw them in a hot pan with a little oil, and stir-fried the whole thing until crispy and tender. It was salty, smoky, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes. This recipe lived in frugal households, school cafeterias, and quick lunch guides because it used the cheapest ingredients possible and still filled you up. Cabbage was a go-to vegetable for stretching meals, and hot dogs were always around because they lasted forever in the fridge. Toss them together, add a little pepper or hot sauce, and lunch was ready fast. Some folks added onions or garlic, but most kept it simple, just cabbage and hot dogs sizzling in the pan. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, warm, and made sure nothing went to waste when groceries were tight. Tuna salad stuffed tomatoes were a colorful and nutritious 10-minute recipe featuring halved tomatoes filled with a quick tuna salad mixture, perfect for lunches or light dinners. The tuna salad was typically made by combining canned tuna with mayonnaise, chopped celery, onions, and seasonings, then spooned into hollowed tomato halves for a visually appealing presentation. This dish offered a refreshing balance of creamy, tangy tuna salad with the juicy, slightly acidic tomato, making it a satisfying yet light meal option. Popular in 1960s America, tuna salad stuffed tomatoes embodied the trend of combining convenience foods with fresh produce for speedy preparation. Served chilled, they were often enjoyed at picnics, buffets, or simple home meals. While less common today, this recipe remains a charming example of mid-century quick dishes that balance taste, nutrition, and ease. Wheat germ and yogurt bowls were the health kick of the 1970s that snuck their way into forgotten cookbooks and quick breakfast guides. You would scoop some plain yogurt into a bowl, toss on a spoonful of wheat germ, maybe drizzle honey or sprinkle nuts if you had them, and breakfast was done in minutes. It was quick, packed with protein, and felt ahead of its time back when most breakfasts were still sugar-heavy cereals or toast. The health-conscious crowd loved it because it kept you full, parents liked it because it was easy, and even the kids got on board, mostly because the yogurt cut through the plain, nutty taste of wheat germ. These bowls were everywhere in the 70s, showing up in homemaker magazines, diet guides, and those community cookbooks with spiral bindings. But like a lot of forgotten breakfasts, they slipped away when trends shifted. Now it is all smoothie bowls and protein shakes. Hot dog and baked bean skillet was one of those quirky 10-minute meals that could only have come from Grandma's old cookbook. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of baked beans. That was it. Dinner done. It sounds ridiculous now, but back when money was tight and every meal counted, this was comfort food at its quickest. The beans were filling, the hot dogs gave you just enough protein, and you could stretch one can to feed the whole family. Some folks got fancy with mustard or onions, but most kept it plain. It was the kind of dish that showed up after a long workday, when you were too tired to fuss with complicated recipes but still needed to put something on the table. It bubbled away on the stove, filling the kitchen with that warm, smoky smell that meant dinner was ready. Today, it feels like one of those meals we forgot on purpose, but for families back then, it was a lifesaver that showed up fast and kept bellies full. Cheese dreams were the open-faced, melty sandwiches that turned plain old white bread into lunch in under 10 minutes. You laid out a slice of bread, topped it with American cheese, and stuck it under the broiler until bubbly and browned. If you had extras lying around, you could throw on a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, but most folks kept it simple. Cheese dreams popped up in every old-school cookbook as a lifesaver for hungry kids, rushed workdays or weekends when grocery shopping had not happened yet. It was one of those lunches that made the most of cheap pantry basics, but still felt warm and filling. The cheese bubbled up golden and gooey, the edges of the bread crisped up just enough, and lunch was done before you even had time to set the table. Families loved it because it tasted good, cost next to nothing, and required zero effort. It was one of those old-fashioned meals that looked like a shortcut but stuck around because it simply worked when time and money were both tight. Cold asparagus and mayonnaise salad was a simple and refreshing side dish featuring tender asparagus spears tossed in a light mayonnaise-based dressing and chilled before serving. Popular in 1960s America, this salad was often served at summer picnics, dinner parties, and holiday meals as a cool counterpoint to richer entrees. The mayonnaise dressing, sometimes flavored with lemon juice or herbs, added creaminess that complemented the crisp yet delicate texture of fresh asparagus. This salad was prized for its ease of preparation and elegant presentation, often arranged on lettuce leaves or decorative plates. It fit perfectly into the 10-minute recipe trend, providing a fresh vegetable option that required minimal cooking or fuss. Although tastes have shifted toward vinaigrette-based dressings, cold asparagus salad remains a nostalgic favorite for those who appreciate classic, creamy vegetable sides that evoke the charm of 1960s dining. Peanut butter and banana on toast was not just a breakfast. It was a survival trick hidden in government pamphlets and school lunch guides from decades past. You toasted a slice of bread, slathered on peanut butter, and sliced up a banana right on top. It sounds basic now, but during hard times, this was protein, potassium, and energy in one affordable package. Families loved it because it was cheap, quick, and used things every pantry had on hand. The United States Department of Agriculture even recommended it for busy families when money was tight but mornings were busier. Sometimes folks sprinkled sugar or honey over it. Other times they kept it plain. Either way, it filled your belly fast and kept you going. It never made the glossy magazine spreads, but it was reliable, frugal, and good enough to get a generation out the door. These days, breakfasts come frozen or boxed, but back then, a piece of toast and a banana could carry you through the morning. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunch boxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Pimento cheese on saltines was a southern staple that turned a few pantry ingredients into a quick, satisfying snack when groceries were running thin. You mixed up pimento cheese, usually some shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, and spread it over saltine crackers. That was it. 10 minutes or less, and you had something creamy, salty, and packed with flavor to hold you over until dinner. It might sound simple now, but back then, this little recipe kept homes running when budgets were stretched and time was short. The saltines gave it crunch, the pimento cheese added richness, and together they made a snack that showed up at school lunches, church picnics, or as a quick fix on busy afternoons. You would find this recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked in faded cookbooks, or passed down through generations of families who knew how to make the most of what they had. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of folks back then, pimento cheese on saltines was a fast, filling favorite that saved the day more than once. Celery boats with peanut butter and raisins were the fun lunch that every old-school cookbook claimed kids would love, even though most kids quietly picked off the raisins when no one was looking. You sliced celery into sticks, filled the groove with peanut butter, and dotted them with raisins, proudly calling them ants on a log. It came together in 2 minutes flat, looked cute, and somehow counted as lunch when the cupboards were nearly empty. Parents loved it because it was quick, frugal, and felt just healthy enough to avoid the guilt of another peanut butter sandwich. It was simple, crunchy, a little salty, and just filling enough to buy you some time before dinner. Banana and wheat germ smoothies were the forgotten health food breakfast from the 1970s, back when nutrition guides promised energy in 10 minutes or less. You would blend a banana with milk, add a spoon of wheat germ, and maybe toss in honey if you had it. That was breakfast, quick, filling, and just trendy enough to feel like you were ahead of the curve. Parents loved it for being affordable, Teens liked it for the simplicity, and health fads leaned hard on it as a protein-packed, no-fuss morning meal. It showed up in old diet books, homemaker columns, and those paper recipe handouts at grocery stores. Wheat germ was the health food of its time, promising fiber and nutrients without all the heavy cooking. Smoothies were new enough to feel exciting but easy enough to show up in every busy household. Somewhere along the way, this breakfast got lost behind flashy protein powders and complicated smoothie bowls, but back then, it quietly kept families full with nothing but fruit, milk, and a blender. Chilled tomato gazpacho shots were a refreshing and flavorful cold appetizer that offered a taste of Mediterranean cuisine adapted to American kitchens in the 1960s. This recipe blended fresh tomatoes with cucumber, bell pepper, garlic, and seasonings into a smooth, chilled soup served in small shot glasses or appetizer cups. Gazpacho's cool temperature and vibrant, tangy flavor made it an ideal starter for summer meals and dinner parties, providing a light and healthy option before the main course. The quick blending process meant the dish could be prepared in 10 minutes or less, fitting the growing desire for fast yet impressive recipes. These tomato gazpacho shots showcased the era's interest in international flavors and novel presentations that elevated simple ingredients. Though gazpacho is more widely known today, serving it in shot-sized portions remains a charming retro way to enjoy this classic cold soup. This recipe reminds us of the 1960s fascination with global cuisine and stylish entertaining made easy. Apple ring pancakes were straight out of those old Betty Crocker cookbooks and Sunday church potlucks that every neighborhood seemed to have. You would slice an apple into thick rings, dip them in pancake batter, and fry them up on the griddle. The result was a warm, fluffy pancake wrapped around sweet fruit, all ready in under 10 minutes. Kids loved them because it felt like dessert for breakfast, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the fridge. Apples were easy to keep on hand. Batter came together fast, and the whole thing cost next to nothing. Some folks dusted them with powdered sugar, others kept it plain, but either way, it was a breakfast that disappeared fast. These showed up everywhere, from rural farmhouses to suburban kitchens, quietly filling plates long before frozen waffles and toaster pastries took over. It is one of those breakfasts you do not hear about anymore. But back then, it was a reliable way to start the day. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Canned sardine and onion sandwiches were the bold, briny lunches that never pretended to be fancy, but quietly stuck around in old cookbooks for decades. You opened a can of sardines, layered them onto bread, added thin slices of raw onion, and called it lunch. That was it, done in minutes and packing more flavor than most people could handle. It was a Depression-era staple that kept going because sardines were cheap, lasted forever, and gave a salty, filling meal with almost no prep. Some folks added mustard or lettuce, but most kept it plain and sharp. The onions gave crunch and heat, the sardines brought salt and oil, and together, it was the kind of lunch that stuck with you, whether you liked it or not. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled you up when the fridge was empty and the grocery budget was tight. You could find this recipe tucked into old homemaker guides listed under quick lunches or pantry meals. It was strong, weirdly satisfying, and pure old-school practicality on a plate. Cold radish and butter sandwiches were a charming garden-inspired treat popular in the 1960s, combining thinly sliced fresh radishes, layered generously with butter on soft white bread. This straightforward recipe required little more than fresh radishes, softened butter, and bread, making it a quick snack or light lunch ideal for warmer months when garden vegetables were plentiful. The sharp, peppery bite of radishes contrasted beautifully with the rich creaminess of butter, offering a simple yet satisfying flavor experience. This sandwich celebrated fresh, seasonal ingredients and the pleasure of uncomplicated food. It was a common choice for tea parties, picnics, or afternoon snacks, embodying the era's appreciation for easy-to-make dishes that did not sacrifice taste or texture. Though less common today, cold radish and butter sandwiches evoke a nostalgic sense of homegrown simplicity and the joy of seasonal eating in mid-century America. Egg in a hole was the breakfast trick every old cookbook seemed to know. Simple enough to pull off in under 10 minutes, but special enough to feel fun. You would cut a hole in the center of a slice of bread, toss it in a buttered skillet, and crack an egg right into the gap. Toasted bread, fried egg, breakfast done, fast and filling with barely any cleanup. It showed up in kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, always tucked between other quick, comforting recipes. Some folks called it toad in the hole, others sunshine toast, but it was always the same idea, a no-fuss breakfast for busy mornings. It used cheap ingredients most families already had and turned them into something that actually made the morning feel bearable. Kids loved it for the novelty, parents loved it for the speed, and nobody complained when breakfast showed up looking fun for once. It is one of those meals that quietly kept mornings moving, long before breakfast sandwiches and drive-through lines took over. Mayo and lettuce sandwiches were one of those simple, no-nonsense Depression-era meals that somehow filled you up when there was not much else to work with. You slapped some mayonnaise on soft sandwich bread, added a few crisp iceberg lettuce leaves, and called it lunch. That was it. It might sound plain today, but back when grocery shelves were bare and paychecks were stretched thin, this quick little meal showed up on a lot of kitchen tables. Families made do with what they had, and mayonnaise gave the sandwich some fat and flavor while lettuce added crunch and made it feel fresh. It was cheap, fast, and surprisingly satisfying when times were tough. You would see it scribbled onto old recipe cards or passed down through word of mouth as a quick lunch fix that cost next to nothing. These sandwiches are mostly forgotten now, but back then, they were a lifesaver that came together in under 10 minutes. Baked bean toasties were the humble, hot lunches that turned pantry staples into something warm and satisfying in under 10 minutes. You grabbed a can of baked beans, spooned them over slices of soft white bread, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and stuck the whole thing under the broiler. The cheese melted, the beans bubbled, and suddenly you had a lunch that felt filling and hearty without needing much effort. This quick meal showed up in old cookbooks, school cafeterias, and busy households when money was tight and grocery runs had not happened yet. It was the kind of food that stretched your budget, filled you up fast, and still tasted good, especially on a cold day when all you wanted was something warm and cheesy. Some folks added hot sauce or chopped onions, but the plain version stayed the classic. Baked bean toasties may not have won style points, but they worked, turning basic ingredients into lunch in record time. Quick pickled onion rings were a tangy and crunchy addition to many 1960s sandwiches and salads, made by soaking thin red onion slices in a simple vinegar brine. This speedy pickling process softened the onion's bite while preserving their vibrant color and crisp texture. The resulting rings added sharp acidity and a refreshing crunch that brightened heavier dishes and complemented cold cuts and burgers. Popular at picnics, barbecues, and casual family meals, these pickled onion rings could be prepared in just minutes and stored for later use. Their ease of preparation and bold flavor aligned with the mid-century preference for quick, flavorful condiments that enhanced simple foods. While pickled onions remain popular today, this particular quick pickling method evokes a nostalgic approach to homemade, tangy toppings that defined 1960s American cooking. Scrambled eggs with evaporated milk were one of those frugal breakfasts tucked inside old homemaker guides and church fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s. The secret was canned milk. You would crack your eggs, whisk in a splash of evaporated milk, and fry them up fast. The milk made them fluffy, rich, and stretch further than plain eggs alone. This mattered more than people today might think. During wartime and lean grocery weeks, a can of evaporated milk was gold. It lasted longer than fresh milk, cost less, and made ordinary eggs feel like a treat. Some families tossed in herbs or cheese if they had extra, but most kept it plain. Soft eggs with just a little salt and pepper. Quick, simple, and done in under 10 minutes. You will not find this recipe on Instagram or in trendy brunch spots, but it kept families fed and mornings moving. People used what they had, made it work, and turned humble ingredients into something satisfying. Share your favorite quick old cookbook memory in the comments. Hit like if you can almost taste it, and subscribe for more forgotten recipes made simple.